Chapter 1. The Cry in the Corridor. The Willow Crest Hotel was the sort of establishment that prided itself on discretion. Its ivy-clad exterior, polished brass fittings, and the faint hush of thick carpets gave it an air of quiet permanence. Guests passed through its lobby with subdued voices, as though even their merriment ought not to rise above a courteous murmur. Nothing untoward was expected to happen here. Miss Jane Marple found herself within its walls almost by accident. She had accompanied her nephew, Raymond West, to a literary exhibition in the city. Raymond, who thrived on such occasions, insisted that his aunt should share the novelty. He declared, with affectionate firmness, that no one had a keener eye for character than she, and that even among bibliophiles and antiquarians, human nature would find a way to peep through. Miss Marple, amused and indulgent, had agreed. The exhibition had been long and somewhat fatiguing. By the time the lamps glowed in the streets, Raymond persuaded her that it would be foolish to attempt the journey back to St. Mary Mead, the trains, Aunt Jane, are hopeless at this hour. We should only suffer draughts and delays. Willow Crest is close by, respectable, comfortable, and quite convenient. You will be spared the trouble. Are near. Miss Marple, who rarely resisted her nephew's enthusiasm, consented, and thus, beneath the soft light of the chandeliers and the discreet gaze of the manager, she entered the Willow Crest. Their bags were dispatched upstairs, and soon the lift, with its brass grille and faint scent of machine oil, bore them to the 5th floor. The corridor that received them was long, hushed, and faintly perfumed with lilies. Small tables, placed at intervals, bore slender vases. The polished wood panels gleamed faintly beneath shaded lamps. Miss Marple observed it all with quiet interest, noting the sheen of wax upon the skirting boards, the exact angle of the curtains at a half-open window. These small things often told more than their owners suspected. It was then that the silence shattered. From the far end of the passage there came a cry, a single word, sharp and unmistakable. Murder. Haver. The sound cut through the hush like a knife. A chambermaid shrieked and dropped her keys. A gentleman in evening dress thrust open his door. Brows knitted. A lady clutched at her pearls and gasped. Doors opened. Faces appeared. The corridor filled with sudden agitation, and all eyes turned, inexorably, toward the end where the door of room number 6 stood ajar, a strip of lamplight spilling across the threshold. Miss Marple moved forward without haste, but with the calm decisiveness that so often steadied those around her. She laid a hand gently upon the chambermaid's arm, whispering a word of reassurance, and advanced toward the open door. Within the room, a dreadful tableau presented itself. A man lay sprawled upon the carpet, his limbs twisted at odd angles, his eyes staring upward with that fixed vacancy which admits of no doubt. Beside him, on the floor, gleamed a revolver, and near the bed stood a young woman, her face drained of all color, her hand still clasping the weapon as though it had been pressed there by some nightmare vision. Her lips moved, but no words came. She gazed, transfixed, upon the lifeless body at her feet. Gasps sounded from the threshold. Someone muttered that the police must be called at once. Another urged the removal of the weapon from the girl's grasp, but no one dared approach. It was not long before Inspector Garrett arrived. summoned swiftly from the local station. He entered with brisk authority, his heavy boots striking the polished floor. He was a man of solid frame and reputation, known for his practical sense and steady habits. With a firm gesture he commanded order, then bent to examine the figure on the carpet. "Andrew Lonsdale," murmured a voice from the hall, passing the name like a whispered spark from lip to lip. The inspector straightened, his face set. He signalled to a constable, who carefully removed the revolver from the young woman's trembling hand. She allowed it without resistance, her wide eyes still fixed upon the dead man. She seemed scarcely conscious of the room around her. Inspector Garrett's gaze swept from the body to the girl, and then rested a moment upon Miss Marple, who had stepped quietly inside. She said nothing, but her eyes clear, mild, yet unyielding, had already noted every corner, every detail, every irregularity. The room bore signs of recent use. The bedclothes were rumpled, the curtains half drawn, the suitcase open with garments folded neatly within. Papers lay scattered upon the small writing desk, as though hastily rifled. A lamp had been overturned, its shade askew. Yet nothing spoke clearly of a struggle, only of a sudden, violent interruption. It was a scene of death, yet also of mystery. And for Miss Marple, the greatest curiosity lay not in the revolver, nor even in the body upon the floor, but in the polished brass numeral affixed to the door. For the Willow Crest, as every guest and every staff member could have testified, contained precisely 7 rooms upon each floor. 7, no more, no less. And yet, here stood a door, marked Room Number 6. A door that, by all accounts, should not have been there at all. Inspector Garrett gave quiet orders. Constables cleared the onlookers from the corridor and closed the door. The manager, pale and perspiring, hovered in the background, wringing his hands and murmuring about the dreadful scandal that must not, at all costs, tarnish the reputation of his establishment. The young woman was led to a chair. A glass of water was pressed into her trembling hands. At last she spoke, her voice no more than a whisper. "I did not kill him. I swear it. I never touched the gun until it was there beside me. I cannot remember. I do not know how it happened." Her words broke into sobs, and she covered her face with her hands. "Your name, miss?" asked the inspector gently. "Clara Whitfield," she murmured. "I am Mr. Farnsworth's niece. He is my guardian. He has cared for me since my parents died. The first Licisti one nighties of mine. Mr. Farnsworth being the proprietor of this hotel. Is it hard?" "Yes." "His mo. Amore." The inspector nodded. He asked a few further questions, but the girl's answers were confused, halting, and incomplete. She insisted she had gone to the room because Mr. Damit, Lonsdale, had sent word that he wished to see her. Beyond that, she could give no account. Inspector Garrett turned to Miss Marple. "You have observed. Madam, what is your impression? And their resource?" Miss Marple's eyes rested thoughtfully on Clara, then on the lifeless figure still stretched upon the floor. "The poor child is terrified," she said softly. "But fear does not always mean guilt." One must be careful not to mistake one for the other. As for the room, I find it peculiar. Dies my $10. The inspector raised an eyebrow. In what way? Zell? That there should be a room number 6 at all, said Miss Marple. The Willow Crest is reputed to have 7 rooms upon each floor, and yet here there appears to be an 8th. A discrepancy of numbering may be trivial. Then again, it may not. He's coming into Menti. Garrett regarded her with respect. He had heard of Miss Marple's reputation for a quiet shrewdness that had aided the authorities more than once. He made a note in his book. Outside. Dawn pressed its grey light against the hotel's tall windows. The brass numeral upon the door shone dully in the new day. To most eyes it was only the number 6. To Miss Marple it was already something more, a puzzle piece. Oddly shaped, waiting to be fitted into the hole. Thus began the strange case of the mystery of room number 6. Chapter 2. A Gun by the Bedside. The Willow Crest was not accustomed to scandal. By the time the morning sun fell across its facade, the news had already travelled from guest to guest with the inevitability of spilled ink. In the dining room, voices were lowered, glances exchanged. Every whispered remark returning at last to the single fact, there had been a murder in room number 6. Raymond West pushed aside his plate untouched. This is intolerable, Aunt Jane, he said in agitation. We ought to remove ourselves at once. To be mixed up in such an affair, it is dreadful. I suppose we shall be questioned. Though what we could possibly add I cannot imagine. Many. In here's a venti? Miss Marple buttered her toast with steady hand. One never knows. Dear Raymond, even trifles may be of consequence. Truth has a way of hiding in corners, and the inspector seems a man who knows where to look. The Mycond. Inspector Garrett was already at his work. Through the night he had secured the corridor, taken preliminary statements from the chambermaid, the porter, and the 2 guests whose rooms were nearest to number 6. Their testimony amounted to little more than the hearing of a single shot. Then the confusion of the alarm. No one claimed to have seen anyone enter or leave. The girl herself had been brought down to a small lounge, away from curious eyes. Clara Whitfield sat pale and still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She seemed scarcely aware of her surroundings. The inspector, patient but firm, began his questioning. Your name? Miss? He masked. Clara Whitfield, she said faintly. You are related to Mr. Farnsworth? Is quite adverse-known. He is my guardian, my uncle by marriage. I have lived with him since my parents died. Ah, yes? And your connection to Mr. Lonsdale? How, Her lips trembled. He was a friend of my uncle. He spoke kindly to me sometimes, but not more than that. Last night he sent word that he wished to see me. I went because it seemed discourteous to refuse. I cannot remember what happened after I entered the room. I heard a sound, and then he was upon the floor. The revolver was there. I found it in my hand. But I did not. Her voice broke. She pressed her hands to her face. The inspector's tone softened. You had no quarrel with him. Is... No? I moved. Nor reason to fear him. A ride. 36 plain 2-1. She shook her head, but said no more. Miss Marple, seated unobtrusively in a corner, watched with gentle eyes. She noted the girl's pallor, the tremor of her hands, the bewilderment that seemed genuine. Fear was there. Yes, but fear and guilt were not the same thing. The revolver lay upon the table, tagged and noted. It was an ordinary weapon, the sort one might purchase without difficulty. No prints were found upon it save Clara's own. To the law that fact was damning. Yet Miss Marple thought it almost too convenient. Mr. Farnsworth himself arrived before noon, summoned from his ivy-covered residence a short distance away. He entered the lounge with evident distress, his broad figure filling the doorway, his florid face heavy with anxiety. Clara rose and clung to him as though to a protector. He patted her shoulder with large hands, his voice swelling in protest. "This is monstrous. Inspector, my niece is incapable of such a deed. She is delicate, gentle. The very notion is absurd. I insist you release her at once. This man Lonsdale was my friend, yes? But whatever his end, Clara could have had no part in it. Too well." Inspector Garrett regarded him levelly. "The facts. Mr. Farnsworth must be pursued." "Oh, and facts," Farnsworth thundered, his voice shaking the lamps. "I tell you, the facts are plain. She is innocent. Look at her. Does that fragile child resemble a murderess? Ah, a speeder farm." Clara shivered against him, her face hidden. Miss Marple, observing, did not miss the flicker of unease in Farnsworth's eyes when the revolver was mentioned, nor the way his fingers gripped the back of the chair until the knuckles whitened. By early afternoon the coroner had been notified, and the body was removed with solemn care. The staff moved about on hushed feet, their discretion strained by the current of curiosity that could not be wholly suppressed. The guests, gathered in little knots in the lounge and the dining room, whispered their theories. Some insisted it was a lovers' quarrel. Others spoke darkly of blackmail, and one imaginative gentleman declared it must be espionage. In each account Clara was, by turns, guilty, innocent, or pitiably ensnared. The inspector listened to none of this chatter. But Miss Marple, who understood better than most the value of idle talk, filed it away with care. Gossip, in her experience, was often no more than the dust of truth blown askew, but when sifted gently, it could reveal the outlines of reality. Mr. Farnsworth, meanwhile, continued to protest his niece's innocence with almost too much fervour. He declared her nerves unequal to such questioning, demanded she be allowed to rest, and railed against the disgrace that threatened his hotel. His words, though full of indignation, seemed to Miss Marple to ring a little hollow, as though his anxiety sprang from more than concern for Clara alone. In the midst of this, Miss Marple asked a question so simple that it made the chambermaid, who happened to be passing, blink in surprise. "How many rooms are there on this floor?" "My dear, his own is that his matters of them all." "7. "Mum," the girl replied promptly. Miss Marple smiled gently. 7. Yes. And yet her eyes drifted down the corridor to where the brass numeral gleamed upon a certain door. One might almost think there were 8. Or perhaps 6. depending how one counts. Variations. Variations bisn't. The girl looked bewildered, bobbed a curtsy, and hurried on her way. Inspector Garrett, who had overheard, regarded Miss Marple with interest. You consider the numbering peculiar. Ascendes. I consider nothing too trivial to be peculiar, she replied softly. Sometimes. Inspector, it is the little things that point the way. Human nature often hides behind details others pass by. His errands in the mains, Contadis' house is of plain. Garrett made another note in his book. He had heard, in more than one quarter, that the gentle spinster from St. Mary Mead possessed an uncanny knack for seeing through the veil of appearances. He was willing, for the moment at least, to trust that reputation. And so, while the hotel murmured with speculation, and the official inquiries went forward, Miss Marple's attention fixed itself not on the revolver, nor even upon poor Clara's trembling denials, but upon the polished numeral that adorned the door of room number 6, for in her long experience, rooms like people sometimes told stories they were not meant to tell. Chapter 3. Shadows at Willow Crest. Inspector Garrett was not a man given to fancies. He preferred facts plain, motives clear, and evidence unambiguous. Yet the case that had come to him in the small hours at the Willow Crest was none of these. A man lay dead, shot through the heart. A revolver had been found in the hand of a trembling young woman. On the surface, it was neat, far too neat. By mid-afternoon, Garrett resolved to call upon John Farnsworth, the proprietor of the hotel. Farnsworth's residence stood only a short walk away, a large ivy-draped house that looked down upon its garden with the solid dignity of comfort and age. He was a widower, known in the district as a man of property and respectability, one who prided himself on order in his home and in his affairs. The drawing-room into which Garrett and Miss Marple were shown bore out that impression. Heavy curtains hung beside tall windows. Richly patterned carpets softened the floor, and the furniture was substantial rather than fashionable. It was a room, Miss Marple thought, in which one might sit for a century without anything very much altering. Farnsworth himself entered with hurried steps, his broad figure filling the doorway. His florid face was flushed, and his eyes darted quickly from the inspector to Miss Marple, then to the young woman who sat pale and silent in a chair by the fire. Clara Whitfield rose uncertainly, then sat again, her hands twisting in her lap. "My niece is distraught," Farnsworth declared at once. "I beg of you, Inspector, let us have no further talk of her involvement in this dreadful business. The very notion is preposterous. She is incapable, utterly incapable of violence. I dis my amity." Garrett inclined his head gravely. "I make no accusations, Mr. Farnsworth, but I must ask questions. His said was remorse, has fading the face. Ask what you will." "Then?" Farnsworth said, though his hand trembled as he adjusted the heavy watch chain across his waistcoat. "But you will find there is nothing here to concern you. This unhappy affair was the work of others, not of her. Every disticam." Inspector Garrett opened his notebook. His tone was courteous but firm. "You were acquainted with Mr. Andrew Lonsdale." "Man!" Farnsworth's hand stilled upon the arm of his chair. For the briefest instant, something flickered across his eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, or unease. Then he cleared his throat. Yes. He was an old friend. He dined with me on occasion. He was welcome in my home. Who's in harp? Was there business between you? Is any nedound? Business, Farnsworth repeated, a flush rising in his cheeks. No. Inspector, none whatsoever. Our friendship was social only. Ma next of use tea elaboratively. Miss Marple, seated quietly in a corner, observed with interest. The denial had come a fraction too quickly. The emphasis a shade too strong. She noted. Two. The tightening of Farnsworth's fingers upon the carved wood of his chair. Garrett turned to Clara. And you... Miss Whitfield. How well did you know Mr. Lonsdale? Is this a very doing to the round assembly is grade for? Her voice was scarcely above a whisper. Not well. He spoke to me kindly sometimes. Nothing more. Last night a message came from him. He asked that I should see him. I thought it would be rude to refuse. As dare I. You went alone. When he's 2. Yes. I's so gay his too blaney. What happened then? I don't had to mention. Clara pressed her hands together, as if to still their trembling. I entered the room. There was a sound I cannot remember clearly. Then he was on the floor. And the revolver, it was in my hand. But I did not. I never. Her words dissolved into silence. Farnsworth rose abruptly and placed a hand upon her shoulder. You see, Inspector, the poor child is distraught. She has been through an ordeal no young woman should ever face. This questioning is cruel. I insist that it cease. His minimum is the death. The inspector regarded him steadily. You will forgive me, sir, if I pursue my duty. The various thrill came an affect of theirs. Miss Marple's gaze moved from uncle to niece. Clara's fragility seemed genuine. Yet Farnsworth's protectiveness was oddly vehement, as though he sought not only to shield her, but to guard something of his own. When the questioning at last concluded, Farnsworth accompanied them to the door with profuse assurances of cooperation. He repeated again and again that he would do everything in his power to assist the police, that his sole concern was for Clara's health and the reputation of the Willow Crest. His voice swelled with indignation at the thought that either might suffer by reason of this unhappy affair. Clara followed a step behind, her pale face troubled, her eyes downcast. She clung to her uncle's sleeve as though he were her only anchor. Farnsworth patted her hand with exaggerated tenderness, glancing frequently toward Inspector Garrett as if to test whether his display of solicitude had been noted. Out in the ivy-shadowed street, Garrett paused to make a note in his book before striding away toward the station. Miss Marple lingered a moment. Turning her head back to the house, Farnsworth still stood in the doorway, watching them depart. It was only an instant, but in that instant Miss Marple saw it clearly, not merely anxiety in his eyes, nor even indignation, but fear, a deep, furtive fear, quickly masked as he raised a hand in farewell. Miss Marple walked on in silence, her neat figure small against the fading light. She had lived too long, and observed too much, to mistake such fear. It was not the fear of scandal alone, nor the fear of loss. It was the fear of discovery. And in her long acquaintance with human nature, she had learned that fear was often the truest clue of all. Chapter 4. The Door That Shouldn't Exist. The Willow Crest Hotel. outwardly so orderly, had begun to reveal cracks beneath its polished surface. Guests whispered in corners. The staff moved with faces carefully composed, and Inspector Garrett maintained a steady presence upon the 5th floor. Miss Marple, however, lingered in the corridor with the air of one who was mildly curious about nothing in particular, a pose that often allowed her to see most clearly. The door to room number 6 stood closed now, its brass numeral catching the light. To any ordinary observer, it was a simple door like the others, giving upon a room like the others, yet Miss Marple's eyes, shrewd and patient, rested upon it with quiet intensity. She had already asked the chambermaid how many rooms lay upon this floor. The answer had been prompt 7, and yet here was this door. It was a small discrepancy, easily overlooked. But Miss Marple had never believed in overlooking things. Human nature, she often reflected, betrayed itself not in great acts, but in small carelessnesses, a button sewn with the wrong thread, a curtain drawn a fraction too far, a numeral upon a door where no numeral should be. She walked slowly along the corridor, pausing at each door in turn. The numbering was consecutive, as one might expect. Yet, when she reached the end, there was the curious fact: 7 rooms accounted for, and yet the mysterious number 6 remained, as though it had insinuated itself into the sequence by stealth. Raymond West, who accompanied her, frowned impatiently. Really, Aunt Jane, must we concern ourselves with hotel numeration at a time like this? A man has been shot. A young woman stands accused. And you are puzzling over arithmetic. I do declare. Miss Marple's smile was indulgent. It is not arithmetic, dear Raymond. It is human nature. And I should like very much to see inside that room again. Anywheres to working has through work, and when he working has follow. Inspector Garrett, who had approached in time to hear her last words, looked at her with professional respect. You believe the room itself is significant? I believe, said Miss Marple softly, that one should never dismiss what is odd. When things are just as they should be, there is no mystery. It is when something is not as it should be that the truth begins to peep through. Not we find. Change it desired. The inspector considered this, then signalled to the constable on duty. The key was produced, and the door to room number 6 was opened once more. Inside, the room looked as it had before, a narrow bed neatly made, a writing table with blotter and inkstand, a wardrobe, a single armchair. The carpet was of a faded pattern, the wallpaper dull and unremarkable. Nothing here suggested tragedy, save only the memory of what had occurred. Yet Miss Marple's eyes roved keenly. She noted the skirting board, slightly misaligned. Near the far corner, she observed the wardrobe, heavy and solid, but standing a fraction out from the wall as though it had once been moved and not properly replaced. She crossed to the mantelpiece, where a small framed print hung crookedly. With gentle fingers she adjusted it, then let her hand rest against the plaster. Her touch was light, yet the faintest hollow sound answered beneath her knuckles. Inspector Garrett stepped forward sharply. What do you see? Ma'am, bed den. The first to be cars, then by ace. Not C. Inspector, here. Miss Marple's smile was apologetic. A wall should sound solid. This one does not. It reminds me very much of a cottage in my own village, where the builder was less than honest and left a void behind the chimney. It caused a most dreadful draught. I wonder. Garrett at once ordered the constable to fetch tools. Within minutes the wardrobe had been shifted, the skirting pried loose, and a portion of the wall carefully tapped. The sound was indeed hollow. At the inspector's direction, a panel was forced open, and a narrow, concealed passageway yawned dark before them. Raymond gasped. Good Lord! A secret chamber? Nos naties. Miss Marple said nothing. She only folded her hands together, her expression grave but unsurprised. The narrow passage admitted them one by one. A lantern was fetched, its yellow light throwing grotesque shadows upon the rough boards. The space beyond was cramped, yet it bore unmistakable signs of use. There was a table, scarred and stained with ink. Upon it lay scraps of paper, a metal plate smeared with dark pigment, and rollers such as a printer might employ. In the corner, a small stove stood cold, but beside it a heap of charred fragments betrayed recent fire. Inspector Garrett bent over the table, his brow furrowing. He lifted a scrap of paper, held it to the light, and whistled softly. Counterfeit notes, he said grimly. By heaven! A press has been at work here. The opted ones. The opted ones. Raymond stared in astonishment. So that was the purpose of room number 6, not for guests at all, but for crime. This mend of Fift. Face Maida that... Miss Marple nodded gently. It is often so. My dear, what appears most ordinary may conceal the most extraordinary of secrets. A room that should not exist is the very place where one should look for what should not be done. Even Nard is not it. The inspector replaced the scrap of paper. His face set that. This puts a different complexion upon the matter. Lonsdale may have known too much, and if so, someone here had every reason to silence him. The sea. The little company emerged once more into the corridor. The door to room number 6 closed behind them. Yet the knowledge of what it concealed remained, heavy and troubling. Guests still passed by unaware. But for those who had seen, the Willow Crest would never seem the same again. Miss Marple walked slowly toward her room, her knitting bag upon her arm, her thoughts, neat and orderly as her stitches, turned over what they had discovered. Murder! Mystery! And now counterfeit money, all bound together by a door that should never have existed. Chapter 5. The Hidden Chamber. The discovery of the concealed passage behind room number 6 spread quickly through the Willow Crest. Though Inspector Garrett ordered strict silence from the staff, whispers ran unchecked along the corridors and down the staircases. Guests spoke in lowered voices over their tea, casting uneasy glances toward the 5th floor. Miss Marple, with her customary unobtrusiveness, observed much and said little. She noticed how the chambermaid avoided the corridor altogether, how the porter crossed himself when he passed the closed door, and how Mr. Farnsworth, the proprietor, grew brusque and pale whenever the matter was mentioned. Inspector Garrett had ordered a thorough examination of the hidden chamber. Under his direction, the constables had removed the printing equipment and gathered the fragments of counterfeit notes. Yet, despite their diligence, there lingered a sense of something unfinished, as though the room still kept secrets it was unwilling to yield. That evening, Garrett summoned Miss Marple to join him in the chamber once more. "I don't mind saying, ma'am," he admitted, "that you see things others don't. I'd be glad of your eye here. There is harm." The old lady smiled, her knitting needles tucked neatly away in her bag. "It is kind of you to say so. Inspector, one does not have sharp eyes." "Perhaps. But one has observed much foolishness in the course of life. And human foolishness, it is very often repeated." 8. Inside the chamber, the lantern light fell across the bare boards. The table was cleared, the stove empty, the fragments collected. Yet Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the walls. She moved slowly, tapping here and there, listening to the sound each gave back. At length she paused by the far side, where a small shelf projected awkwardly. Her fingers brushed dust aside, revealing faint marks in the wood. "This," she murmured, "has been shifted more than once. This was, so it was speckit for the bairns. That was no grating what in." Garrett crouched beside her, running his hand along the same place. A concealed latch gave way, and with a creak a narrow panel opened, disclosing a still smaller recess beyond. Within lay a tin box, battered and old. Garrett lifted it out with care, snapped the clasp, and drew forth a packet of papers. His face hardened as he read the first few lines. "Letters," he said, "and by the look of them blackmail. There, and Usbogare." Garrett spread the papers upon the table, the lamplight glinting on the faded ink. Each sheet bore Andrew Lonsdale's signature, though the tone varied, some urgent, some angry, others pleading. The inspector read a few lines aloud, his voice low and grim. "I cannot continue in this fashion. You promised discretion, and yet you press me still. If these matters were to come before the public, my career would be ruined. Have pity, or name your price once and for all. Goo." He set the page down, his jaw tightening. "It's plain enough." Lonsdale was being bled. Someone had hold of him, and wasn't letting go. They... Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes kind but keen. "Blackmail is an old sin. Inspector, it feeds upon fear, and the fearful will sometimes pay anything until they resolve to pay nothing at all. That, I think, is when danger comes." "No." Raymond, who had followed with nervous curiosity, gave a soft exclamation. "Then whoever kept this chamber was the blackmailer, and Lonsdale was their victim. And Devry is—" Miss Marple shook her head gently. "Perhaps. Or perhaps Mr. Lonsdale himself played a double part. We must never leap too quickly to conclusions. Raymond, it is very often the wrong leap. They have not Anheimer's?" Garrett continued to examine the bundle. Some letters were from Lonsdale, but others, more cryptic, bore no signature at all, only sharp demands, couched in vague but threatening terms. One phrase recurred again and again: "Your betrayal shall not stand." "Janist?" The inspector frowned. "This is the very phrase we found charred among the ashes. Miss Marple, a letter burned in haste, and yet here it appears again. Is it the candor?" Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed. It suggests that whoever occupied this chamber was careless or desperate. To repeat oneself is a dangerous habit. Inspector? It makes one easier to trace. The Strite. She touched one paper lightly, her voice very calm. Do you not find it curious, Inspector, that the blackmailer should store such letters here, in a place so very dangerous to them, rather than destroy them? Perhaps? Garrett looked up sharply. Curious indeed. Unless they meant to keep them as a weapon. Is there not any fictive vespers? The inspector was still turning over the incriminating papers when a sharp knock sounded upon the chamber door. Farnsworth entered, his expression taut with courtesy. I was told you required me. Inspector, he said smoothly. I hope matters are progressing, and that nothing more has been found to distress my niece. N'extoire, Yves not de film. Garrett regarded him with a level gaze. Indeed. Something more has been found. Mr. Thesis. Farnsworth. These letters. Perhaps you can explain their presence here in a hidden recess behind room number 6. Eyes. For a fleeting second, Farnsworth's composure faltered. His eyes flickered toward the bundle on the table, and the hand that smoothed his moustache trembled slightly. Then he gave a short laugh. My dear sir, this is most extraordinary. I cannot account for such things. That room, as I have already told you, it was never intended for guests. It has been closed for years. If criminal hands have made use of it, they did so without my knowledge. This to first, a knavery. Garrett's brows drew together. Yet you, as proprietor, must have known of the concealed door. Few others could have. Then, mine, ban, bine, 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 bine. Farnsworth spread his hands in protest. The house is old. Inspector. Many strange corners it has. I do not pretend to know them all. As for these letters, I can only suppose they were planted here to cast suspicion where it does not belong. That not of verre, when I good Nixtinden. Miss Marple, who had sat quietly throughout, now raised her gentle voice. It is very odd. Mr. Farnsworth, that such planting should echo the very phrase we found burnt in the grate. Your betrayal shall not stand. It is not a common turn of speech. Surely you would agree. This I must seer, the reigned of ciders very enter. Farnsworth's lips parted, but no words came. He recovered himself quickly, murmuring some vague agreement. Yet Miss Marple had seen the shadow that crossed his face, a shadow of recognition, swiftly veiled. As Farnsworth withdrew, his step a little uneven, the inspector turned to Miss Marple. You saw it. Mum, do for. She nodded. Oh, yes. Inspector, I saw it. He is afraid. And fear, you know, is very seldom without reason. How must... Chapter 6. The Face Behind the Mask. The morning after the discovery of the hidden chamber dawned grey and unsettled. Clouds hung low over the rooftops of the Willow Crest, and a chill mist crept in from the river. Within the hotel, guests moved with unease. whispering in corners, casting sidelong glances whenever Clara Whitfield passed. Clara herself appeared wan and fragile, her eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. She clung to her uncle's arm at breakfast, scarcely touching her food, answering questions in a voice scarcely above a whisper. Farnsworth maintained his air of outraged dignity, but the hand that buttered his toast trembled slightly. Inspector Garrett, having spent the greater part of the night in consultation with his men, called Miss Marple into a quiet corner of the lounge. "We are closing in, ma'am," he said quietly. "The evidence from room number 6 grows heavier by the hour. Yet I confess, I cannot yet put my hand on the true culprit. Too many masks, too many faces. They's present all." Miss Marple smiled gently. "Ah, but masks, Inspector, have a way of slipping. And when they do, one must be ready to look very closely at the face beneath. Is no dimation." At that moment, a constable approached with a small parcel wrapped in brown paper, found in the waste bin near the servants' quarters. "Sir." Garrett unwrapped it swiftly. Within lay a pair of gloves, stained faintly with ink, and a small vial half filled with dark pigment. Miss Marple bent over them, her expression thoughtful. "So," she murmured, "even in throwing things away, people betray themselves. One cannot so easily discard guilt. It clings like ink to the fingers." There were four. Garrett gave a curt nod. "We shall trace these. Never fear. Someone has been careless. And God." But Miss Marple's eyes had strayed toward Farnsworth, who at that very moment had entered the lounge. He paused, just long enough to see the objects upon the table, before turning briskly away. Yet the slight quickening of his breath, the tightening of his jaw, did not escape her notice. Clara was summoned later that morning to speak once more with Inspector Garrett. She came reluctantly, her hands twisting a crumpled handkerchief, her eyes darting nervously about the room. Miss Marple sat quietly in a corner, her knitting untouched in her lap, watching with calm attention. Garrett began gently, as though speaking to a frightened child. "Miss Whitfield, you must try to remember. When you entered room number 6 that night, what did you see? What did you hear?" "That's all. It is a naughty. That's all." Clara's voice was low and uneven. I was told to come. There was a note. I thought it was from Mr. Lonsdale. He asked me to meet him there at midnight. I was afraid. But he said it was important. This goes." Her breath caught, and she pressed the handkerchief to her lips. "When I went in, the lamp was burning. Mr. Lonsdale stood by the table. He looked, strange, troubled. He said only a few words, and then there was a sound, a terrible sound, and he fell. I do not know how the revolver came into my hand. I do not know. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I would never harm him, never. I only wished to help. Is this of orders, ma'am?" Garrett regarded her closely. "And the note? Where is it now?" "Channy." Clara shook her head miserably. I do not know. It was gone when I looked again." Miss Marple spoke softly, her voice full of kindness. "Sometimes My dear, memory falters when fear presses too hard. But even when the mind forgets, the truth remains, waiting to be found. Now, Mrs. Noddy Hand. Clara raised her eyes to the old lady's, clinging to the calm assurance she saw there. For a moment, some of the terror lifted from her face. When she was dismissed, Farnsworth swept her away with protective haste, his hand firm upon her shoulder. His indignation rang through the hall as he muttered of injustice, of persecution, of a young life blighted. Yet beneath the thunder of his words, Miss Marple had noted the the furtive glance he cast toward Inspector Garrett's desk, toward the letters taken from the hidden chamber. When the Whitfields had gone, Inspector Garrett let out a weary sigh. I cannot decide. Miss Marple. The girl is either the most accomplished actress I have ever seen, or she is indeed as innocent as she appears. Nay, those no to ver. Miss Marple looked thoughtfully at the closed door through which Clara had passed. There are many kinds of acting. Inspector. Some act for others, some act even for themselves. But innocence, you know, has a simplicity that cannot easily be feigned. Did you notice how her voice faltered when she spoke of the revolver? That was no pretense. She does not understand how it came into her hand, because she truly does not know. Is alas. Garrett frowned. Then who placed it there? Who fired the shot? This spies. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly once or twice before she answered. We are not yet ready to pull aside the mask. But we must keep in mind, Inspector, that those who shout most loudly of injustice, who thunder of virtue and reputation, are often those who have most to conceal. Watch carefully, and you will see the mask slip. And when it does, the face beneath will be most instructive. Is crassed. Garrett closed the notebook with a snap. You mean Farnsworth? He see what it hands of lift. Miss Marple said nothing. She merely smiled her small, secret smile, and returned serenely to her knitting. But in her eyes there was a glint of certainty, a glint that told she had already glimpsed, if only for a moment, the face behind the mask. Chapter 7. Secrets Behind the Wall. The following afternoon, Inspector Garrett summoned workmen to the Willow Crest. Their tools clattered in the corridor as curious guests craned their necks, whispering about hidden rooms and ancient crimes. Miss Marple stood quietly aside, her small figure almost lost in the gathering crowd. She watched as the panel in the wall of room number 6 was prized open, revealing once more the narrow passage leading to the concealed chamber. Dust billowed out, thick with the scent of long confinement. Within, the chamber was dim and airless. The single lamp that had been set there cast a yellow glow over the objects strewn about, fragments of paper, a broken chair, a small stove, long unused. But it was the great iron chest against the far wall that drew all eyes. Garrett ordered it forced open. The lock yielded with difficulty, and as the lid creaked back, a murmur ran through the room. Stacks of banknotes lay within not genuine currency, but forgeries, cunningly printed. Plates and inks lay beside them, a proof of a criminal enterprise of no small scale. Raymond West, who had pressed forward with youthful eagerness, gave a low whistle. So, this was the secret of room number 6. A printing press for false money. Well manned. Garrett bent over the notes, his jaw set met. A dangerous business, and one that may well have led to murder. Andrew Lonsdale must have threatened exposure, and for that he was silenced. "There's revecking in wands." Miss Marple said nothing. Her eyes moved from the chest to the floor, noting a trail of scuff marks where something heavy had been dragged. She followed them to the corner, where a pile of discarded papers lay half-burned in a small brazier. Carefully, she stooped and lifted one charred scrap. Upon it were still legible the words, "Your betrayal shall not stand." Azendia. Her expression grew grave. "So," she murmured softly. "The mask grows thinner. It is not only greed we deal with, Inspector, but betrayal and a passion that burns hot enough to kill. Isn't?" Garrett straightened, glancing at her sharply. But Miss Marple had already tucked the fragment neatly away, her face composed. As the investigators examined the counterfeit notes, the door opened sharply and Farnsworth entered, his face flushed with indignation. Clara trailed behind him, pale and trembling, as though drawn unwillingly into the room. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Farnsworth demanded, his voice resonant with anger. "You tear down my walls. You disturb my property. You spread calumny before my niece. And for what? A heap of rubbish. A collection of worthless paper. Isabelle." Inspector Garrett held up one of the forged notes. "Worthless, perhaps, Mr. Farnsworth, but dangerous nonetheless. This is no mere rubbish. It is evidence of a criminal enterprise, one that cost Andrew Lonsdale his life. The fangs." Farnsworth's eyes blazed. "Lonsdale was my friend. To suggest that I, who welcomed him under my roof, would stoop to such villainy is outrageous. Clara, my dear, you see how they persecute us? How they twist every circumstance to blacken our names? Oh?" Clara's lips moved, but no sound came. She seemed rooted to the spot, her gaze fixed in horror upon the chest with its stacked false currency. Miss Marple observed her closely, then shifted her gaze back to Farnsworth. His tirade was loud, his gestures extravagant, but his hands, she noticed, remained clenched tightly at his sides, as though to still their trembling. Garrett said coldly, "We shall have experts examine these plates and notes. If your name is untainted, Mr. Farnsworth, you have nothing to fear. But know this, the truth cannot be hidden forever behind walls, however cleverly concealed. Their seas was the mend, when to well I nigh." For a moment Farnsworth faltered. The colour drained from his cheeks, only to return with renewed heat. "I will not endure this insult," he cried. "You exceed your authority. I shall appeal to higher powers. Is need to." Yet even as he thundered, Miss Marple caught again that fleeting shadow in his eyes, not anger this time, but stark fear. When at last the chamber was sealed and the forged notes gathered into evidence, Inspector Garrett led the way back into the corridor. The crowd of curious guests had dispersed, leaving only the hush of whispered speculation behind closed doors. Miss Marple walked slowly at his side, her hands folded neatly before her. For some moments she said nothing, her gaze resting thoughtfully upon the faded carpet beneath their feet. At length Garrett spoke. "The man blusters, but he cannot disguise the truth. Every word condemns him further." "Azir." Miss Marple inclined her head. Bluster is often the refuge of those who tremble within. Did you see how his hands remained clenched? He dared not let them move, for they would have betrayed the fear he tried so hard to conceal. There's Ruhe. He's not wines. Garrett frowned. Fear? Yes, but of what? Exposure. Imprisonment. Or something deeper still. Ever mated ones? The old lady's eyes softened. There are many faces to fear. Inspector. Sometimes it is the fear of justice. Sometimes of ruin. But more often than not, it is the fear of truth for truth. Once revealed, cannot be silenced again. Heavy speeties. They paused at the head of the stair. Miss Marple's gaze travelled once more along the corridor to the door marked Room Number 6. To others it was merely a number, a room among many. But to her, it was a mask of wood and paint, behind which secrets had long been hidden. And like all masks, she knew it must soon slip. Chapter 8. The Picture on the Mantel. The drawing-room of the Willow Crest had seldom held so tense a company. Guests who had once strolled its carpet with idle leisure now gathered in uneasy clusters, speaking in subdued tones. The air was thick with apprehension, for the shadow of room number 6 lay heavy upon the house. Inspector Garrett stood near the hearth, the charred fragment of a letter upon the table before him. His hand rested upon it as though to assert its weight. Clara Whitfield sat apart, her face pale, her hands twisting a kerchief into knots. Farnsworth hovered at her side, alternately patting her shoulder and glaring defiance at the inspector. Miss Marple occupied a small chair by the window, her knitting in her lap, though her needles lay still. Her eyes, bright and mild, travelled over each countenance in turn. She saw guilt disguised as indignation, anxiety cloaked in protestations, innocence shadowed by doubt. Upon the mantel above the hearth stood a row of photographs, stiff family groups. A silver-framed portrait of Farnsworth in earlier days. A likeness of Clara as a child. But it was another picture, a faded snapshot in a plain frame that caught Miss Marple's eye. It showed Andrew Lonsdale with a hand upon Farnsworth's shoulder, both men smiling in the sunlight. Yet the smile on Lonsdale's lips had in it a trace of mockery, while Farnsworth's eyes held something darker, almost resentful. Softly, Miss Marple rose and approached the mantel. "A curious thing, is it not?" she murmured. "How the camera captures what words may not. A smile may hide much, but the eyes, they often betray the truth. This was 7 in the face en a reed and hever, sewer in kuffel over." Garrett joined her, studying the photograph intently. Farnsworth gave a sharp laugh. "A trifle. A holiday snap taken years ago. Will you now build accusations on shadows in a photograph?" Miss Marple did not answer. Her fingers touched the frame lightly, then moved to the charred fragment upon the table. Her gaze lingered there, and in her expression was a quiet certainty. Inspector Garrett lifted the charred scrap of paper. "This, Mr. Quiet, Farnsworth, was not written in holiday spirit. Your betrayal shall not stand those words burned in Lonsdale's fire before his death. Would you call this, too, a trifle?" Farnsworth's face hardened. "I know nothing of such melodrama." Andrew was a man given to rash expressions. "If he quarrelled with someone, I cannot be held responsible." Eh? Miss Marple spoke gently, her eyes still upon the photograph. And yet, Mr. Farnsworth, the quarrel seems to rest closer than you admit. Andrew Lonsdale threatened to expose the secret behind room number 6. Did he not? He had stumbled upon the chamber, upon the plates, upon the false notes, and he turned to you, his friend, believing you complicit. Nay, Zonny. A hush fell over the room. Clara's hands stilled upon her kerchief. Her eyes widened with terror. Garrett pressed forward. He came to you for explanation. Instead, he found a revolver raised against him. When he fell, you contrived to place the weapon in Clara's hand to throw suspicion upon her. 9. Foremost. Farnsworth's laugh rang hollow. Nonsense. A fabrication worthy of the theatre. I shall not listen to it. This time. But his bluster came too late. In Clara's eyes dawned a memory half repressed the dim corridor. Her uncle's voice summoning her, the sudden sound that froze her blood. She rose unsteadily. Uncle, she whispered, tell them it is not true. Tell them you did not. Her voice broke. Farnsworth turned upon her swiftly, his hand gripping her arm. Be silent. Child, you do not understand. I musting. Yet in his face all saw the truth, a mask torn aside. Inspector Garrett stepped forward, his voice stern. It is finished. Farnsworth, the counterfeit, the letters, the hidden chamber, and now your own niece's recollection. You may protest, but the evidence speaks louder than your words. Des. Farnsworth's grip on Clara slackened. For a moment he swayed. His proud shoulders bowed beneath a weight too heavy to bear. The defiance ebbed from his face, leaving only exhaustion and despair. Miss Marple's quiet voice filled the silence. It was fear that betrayed you, Mr. Farnsworth. Fear in your eyes when you thought yourself unobserved. Fear that the truth would slip from the mask you wore. Andrew Lonsdale was not the first to see it, but he was the last. And when he threatened to speak, you silenced him. Farnsworth covered his face with his hands. A low groan escaped his lips. It is true, I could not let him ruin us. The debts, the disgrace, the end of all I had built. I meant only to frighten him. But when the shot rang out, he broke off, sinking into a chair, utterly undone. Clara gave a stifled cry, but Miss Marple was beside her in an instant, laying a gentle hand upon her arm. You need not fear. My dear, the truth is sometimes cruel, but it is also a kind of freedom. Your name would be cleared. Around the land. Garrett signalled to his men. They stepped forward, placing a firm hand upon Farnsworth's shoulder. The once proud proprietor of Willow Crest rose slowly, as though each step were a burden, and was led away. For a long moment the room was still. Then Miss Marple turned once more to the photograph upon the mantel. Strange, she murmured, how a picture may outlive both truth and lies, but the eyes they cannot conceal forever. As Cantodet was the first. Epilogue. A quiet return. The scandal of Willow Crest did not linger long in the public prints. A discreet notice reported the arrest of John Farnsworth upon charges of counterfeiting and murder. Clara Whitfield, though sorely tried, was cleared of suspicion. The revolver no longer a weight upon her name. In time she would leave the shadows of the hotel, to begin anew in quieter surroundings, her inheritance safe from the hand that had sought to imperil it. Inspector Garrett, satisfied that justice had prevailed, closed his notebook upon the case with a sense of sober duty done. As for Miss Marple, she returned to St. T. Mary Mead with little ceremony, carrying only her knitting bag and a small parcel of books purchased at the exhibition. To those who ask, she spoke merely of a curious incident at a hotel, with no hint of the darkness she had witnessed. Seated once more in her familiar parlour, she looked out upon her neat garden, where the roses lifted their heads to the sun. She set her needles clicking, content with the quiet rhythm. For she knew, as she had always known, that beneath the calm surface of life there ran hidden currents, secrets, deceits, and sometimes crimes. And she knew, too, that truth, though delayed, had a way of rising like a seed pushing through soil, or like a smile in a photograph that betrayed more than it concealed. Thus the affair of room number 6 passed into memory. Another shadow lifted, another mask removed, and, in the gentle village of Centre, Mary Mead, Miss Jane Marple resumed her peaceful vigil, ever watchful, ever certain that the little things, the trifles of human nature, were the key to great truths.